You're crouched behind a rock, 30 hours without food. Your hands are shaking. Somewhere behind you, your children are asleep, too weak to cry anymore. And in your hand is a decision no parent should ever have to make. This isn't a story. This happened thousands of times in thousands of camps across 40,000 years of human history. And what you're about to hear isn't in most textbooks. It's written in bones. Let's start with your body. Right now, if you skipped a meal, you'd feel irritable, maybe a headache. That's nothing. That's a warning light on a full tank. But go 3 days without food and something else happens. Your body starts eating itself. Not metaphorically, literally. First, it burns through your liver's glycogen stores. That's gone within 24 hours. Then it turns to fat. That's the merciful phase. Your body converting stored energy into ketones. Fuel for your brain. This is why the first days of starvation feel almost clear-headed. Some survivors describe a strange calm, but that calm is borrowed time. By day 5 or 6, fat reserves start running low, especially if you were lean to begin with. And most ancient humans were lean, so the body moves to its last resort. Muscle, your own muscle tissue, including, eventually, your heart. Here's what scientists actually found when they studied famine victims from Ireland in the 1840s, from the Dutch hunger winter of 1944, and from isotopic analysis of prehistoric skeletons. The pattern is identical every time. The body cannibalizes itself in a specific order. Fat first, then skeletal muscle, then organ tissue. The heart is one of the last things to go, because without it, nothing else matters. Now imagine living through that with no hospital, no for-drip, no emergency food bank. Imagine that being not a rare tragedy, but a recurring feature of your entire existence. That was life for most of human history. Anthropologists estimate that for 99% of the time humans have existed on this planet, seasonal food shortage was an exception. It was a baseline. So what did they do? What did ancient humans actually do when the food ran out completely? The answer isn't what you'd expect. And it's not one answer. It's a ladder, a series of steps, each one darker than the last, that groups climbed only when they had no other choice. Have you ever wondered why you crave sugar and fat so intensely, even when you know you shouldn't? Why a bag of chips feels almost impossible to stop eating? That craving isn't a modern flaw. It's an inherited survival algorithm, tuned over 100,000 years of feast or famine cycles. Your brain still thinks the next famine could be tomorrow. It's still preparing you to survive a world that, for most of us, no longer exists. That's the first hidden truth. But it's nowhere near the darkest one. Let's go back to the ladder. The first rung was mobility. When local food disappeared, hunter-gatherer bands didn't sit and wait to die. They moved, constantly. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups, like the Hadza of Tanzania and the Kung of the Kalahari, show something remarkable. They don't stay in one place for more than a few weeks at a time, and much of that movement is driven directly by food scarcity. But moving takes energy. And when you're already starving, every mile you walk burns calories you don't have. So movement was a gamble. Stay, and risk running out completely. Move, and risk collapsing halfway to the next food source. Ancient humans made this calculation constantly, with their children's lives on the line, without any of the tools we'd use today to plan a route or check a weather forecast. The second rung was diet expansion. This is where things get genuinely uncomfortable. When preferred foods vanished, ancient humans didn't just tighten their belts. They ate things modern humans would consider unthinkable. Bone marrow, cracked open with rocks, even from animals other predators had already stripped clean. Insects in massive quantities. Some estimates suggest insects made up a meaningful protein source for many prehistoric populations, not as a novelty, but as a staple. Tree bark, ground into a kind of flour, documented in famine diets from Scandinavia to Siberia well into the modern era. Roots so fibrous and bitter, they required hours of processing just to become edible without poisoning you. Here's what scientists actually found analyzing dental wear patterns on prehistoric skulls. During identified famine periods, the microscopic scratches on tooth enamel change dramatically. The scratches get deeper and more chaotic, consistent with grinding tough, low-quality, fibrous foods. In other words, we can literally read starvation off someone's teeth thousands of years after they died. Think about that for a second. Every hard, jaw-aching meal you've ever eaten is nothing compared to what a genuinely desperate ancient human forced themselves to chew day after day, just to survive one more week. But even diet expansion has a limit. And when that limit was reached, ancient humans climbed to the third rung. And this is where the story stops being about survival skills and starts being about something far more disturbing. What you're about to hear was hidden from most history books for a very simple reason. It's uncomfortable. It challenges the story we like to tell about ourselves, that early humans were noble, cooperative, bonded by unconditional loyalty to their tribe. The archaeological and anthropological record tells a more complicated story. When famine became severe and prolonged, some groups made a choice that modern audiences find almost impossible to process. They allocated food unequally, deliberately, not evenly split among everyone, but funneled toward those most likely to survive and reproduce. Researchers studying famine behavior across multiple hunter-gatherer and small-scale agriculture societies have documented a grim but consistent pattern. In the worst shortages, food often went first to hunters and able-bodied adults of reproductive age, then to older children. Infants and the elderly were frequently last in line. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was cold biological math, made by people with no other option. A hunter who eats survives to hunt again tomorrow and might feed the whole group. An infant who eats today might still die tomorrow regardless. Groups that made this calculation, however, brutal it sounds to us now, were more likely to have surviving descendants. Groups that often didn't survive at all. Does that make you uncomfortable? It should, but ask yourself something. Have you ever heard a phrase like, put your own oxygen mask on first? That instruction, given on every commercial flight, is the exact same triage logic, softened by 100,000 years of civilization and repackaged as safety advice. The ancient calculation never disappeared. We just built polite language around it. Now here's the part that goes even further, and it's backed by physical, bone-deep evidence, not speculation. In several documented cases of extreme historical famine, the Donner Party crossing the Sierra Nevada in the winter of 1846 being one of the most well-studied examples in North America, starving groups eventually turned to consuming the bodies of those who had already died. Forensic archaeologists examining remains at the Alder Creek campsite found cut marks on bone consistent with butchery, not violence. This wasn't murder. It was desperate people past every other option, making a choice to survive using what remained of those they'd already lost. And this wasn't isolated to one wagon train in the 1800s. Archaeological sites across Europe, dating back tens of thousands of years, show similar cut mark patterns on human bone found alongside animal remains, processed the exact same way. Some of these sites predate agriculture entirely. Some are associated with confirmed environmental collapse, sudden climate shifts that wiped out the animals and plants entire populations depended on. Here's what scientists actually found that makes this even more unsettling. In several of these sites, the human bones show evidence of being processed with the same efficiency, the same practice technique, as the animal bones nearby. Whoever did this had done it before. It wasn't chaos. It was a grim, learned skill, passed down the same way flint knapping or fire starting was passed down. A skill nobody wanted to need, but everybody knew how to use if it came to that. Sit with that for a moment. Somewhere in your ancestry, on some unrecorded night, in some unrecorded winter, a choice like that might have been made. Not by monsters, by people exactly like you, pushed past every boundary they thought they had, try and keep the last of their family alive one more week. This is the point where most videos on this topic stop. But there's one more layer, and it's arguably the most psychologically revealing of all. Because starvation didn't just change what ancient humans ate. It changed who they trusted. Anthropologists studying famine-era social structures found a consistent, almost universal pattern. As food scarcity worsened, group cohesion didn't strengthen. It fractured. Small factions formed. Food theft, rare in times of abundance, spiked sharply. Accusations of hoarding tore through camps. In several documented historical famines, including in 19th century Ireland and pre-modern China, Neighbors who had shared meals for years turn on each other within weeks once the food genuinely ran out. Why does this matter to you right now in a world with grocery stores on every corner? Because that same wiring is still installed in your brain. Have you ever felt a flash of irrational anger when someone took the last slice of pizza? Ever notice how arguments about money and resources cut deeper, faster, and uglier than almost any other kind of conflict? That's not a personality flaw. That's 40,000 years of famine logic, firing in a context that no longer requires it. Modern psychologists have a name for a version of this: scarcity mindset. Studies on poverty and decision-making show that when people experience genuine resource scarcity, even temporarily, their cognitive bandwidth narrows. Long-term planning suffers. Impulsivity rises. Trust in others drops measurably. This isn't a modern glitch. It's an ancient survival protocol, doing exactly what it evolved to do, just in a world that has changed faster than our biology has. So think about that the next time you feel a flare of anxiety in a crowded supermarket or an irrational urge to buy in bulk during a shortage scare. That reaction that feels so personal, so uniquely yours, is actually one of the oldest programs in the human operating system, running quietly in the background of every single one of us. Now for the final piece. The part saved for last because it's the hardest one to hear. Beyond diet expansion, beyond unequal food allocation, beyond even consumption of the already dead, there's evidence of something even more difficult to process. In a small number of documented prehistoric and historical famine sites, researchers have found evidence consistent with what's called survival cannibalism involving members of the same living group. In the most extreme, terminal stage famine conditions, situations where every other option had already failed, and death of the entire group was otherwise certain. This is not common. It's not typical. It represents an absolute last resort, documented in only a small fraction of the sites examined, always tied catastrophic, sustained environmental collapse, volcanic winters, multi-year droughts, ice age cold snaps that wiped out every other food source for hundreds of miles. But it happened, and it's part of the honest record of what our species is capable of when pushed to the absolute edge of existence. Here's what makes this piece of evidence so significant. In these extreme cases, isotopic and forensic analysis suggests these decisions were rarely made lightly or randomly. They followed patterns. The same brutal, calculated triage logic seen in food allocation. The same practice processing techniques seen with the deceased. Even at humanity's absolute lowest point, there was still structure, still decision-making, still, in the most horrifying possible circumstances, an attempt to preserve as many lives as could possibly be preserved. That's the piece that should genuinely change how you see ancient humans. Not as savages acting on animal instinct, not as noble survivalists untouched by darkness, but as something far more relatable and far more unsettling. People, exactly like you, capable of extraordinary cooperation and extraordinary horror, sometimes within the same winter, sometimes within the same family, making impossible choices, with nothing but the tools and knowledge available to them at the time. So here's the question worth sitting with. You live in a world where food is, for most of us, never more than a few minutes away. A world our ancestors could not have possibly imagined. One where hunger is an inconvenience rather than a death sentence. And yet the wiring they left you with, the anxiety, the hoarding instinct, the flash of anger over the last slice, the deep bone-level fear of running out, never got the memo. It's still running, still watching, still preparing you for a famine that, for now, isn't coming. The real question isn't what ancient humans would do if the food ran out. You already know. The real question is whether you'd recognize the same instincts rising in yourself, long before you ever had to find out.